Chapter 10, Order. The dolls hid in the Lego hut for 2 hours. They huddled in the middle, as far from the door as possible, even though Annabelle pointed out that lizards probably don't know how to open doors. Finally, Melody said, "You know, we're going to have to go out there and find Carl." "Carl is the lizard," she told Annabelle and Tiffany. "We have to clean up this mess, too. We can't leave BJ's room looking like this." The other dolls nodded. "What are we going to do with Carl when we find him?" asked Tiffany. "Get him back in the cage somehow," said Melody. Annabelle was barely listening to this conversation. A very worrisome thought had occurred to her. Finally, she asked, "Does BJ's room get this messy every weekend?" "Usually," replied Penny. "Sometimes even messier." "Messier," whispered the cutouts. "Do you always manage to put everything back in order before BJ comes home?" "We try. BJ's room is so messy that it's a little hard to tell," said Yvonne. "We figure he won't notice if a few things are left." "Has there ever been anything big that you couldn't fix? I mean, did you ever have to leave a Lego building broken or a car loose or something heavy knocked over?" asked Annabelle. Melody stared at Annabelle. "Why?" she asked. "What are you trying to say?" "Well, I'm just looking around at this mess." Annabelle pointed out the window in the Lego hut and thinking how hard it would be to clean it up. "And I'm wondering what will happen if we can't catch Carl. I know we can't fix the rip in the poster or the nick in the bed. And I'm guessing this happens almost every weekend. That there's something still broken or torn or out of place when BJ comes home." Annabelle paused, drew in her breath. "Don't you think maybe BJ's family is starting to get suspicious?" she finally said. Before anyone spoke, Annabelle had her answer. The faces of the other dolls told her everything, and Annabelle felt something inside her grow very heavy. And after a moment, Waterfall sighed and said, "We do think that they're getting suspicious." "And what," went on Annabelle, wishing that she didn't have to say this, "do you think that is going to mean for the other dolls and the other humans in other houses?" "We don't know," said Melody. "We can barely stand to think about it. We just clean up here as well as we can, and we hope for the best." "Mean Mimi," said Annabelle slowly, "is a menace to all of dollkind." Nobody disagreed with her. The dolls sat silently in the hut until from somewhere in BJ's house they heard the clock chime. 4:30, said Beth, sounding concerned. "We can't wait any longer. We have to start cleaning up. This is probably going to take all night." "We'll look for Carl while we work," said Waterfall. Has he ever escaped before?" asked Tiffany. "Nope, this is the first time." "Have you ever touched Carl?" asked Annabelle. "Nope, and I'd rather not think about that. We don't have a choice. We have to put Carl in his cage if we find him. So let's get started." "How can you stand this?" asked Tiffany. "Mean Mimi causes trouble for you every weekend, and then you have to clean up after her." "Like I said," Waterfall replied, "we don't have a choice." Annabelle, Tiffany, the cutouts, the PJ party pals, the troll twins left the safety of the hut, and they peered cautiously around BJ's room. There was no sign of Carl. "All right, let's get started," said Yvonne. "We don't know where things go," Tiffany pointed out, "so you'll have to tell Annabelle and I what to do." The dolls worked side by side for hours. No one spoke except to say, "The cars go back in Callie's room," or "Help me take this barricade apart," or "Just leave those things there." I think they were already on the floor. And every now and then someone would scream, "There he is, there's Carl," and then they realized, no, that was one of BJ's plastic lizards. It was early Sunday morning. The sun was streaming through BJ's windows and brightening his room when Tiffany caught sight of Carl. "There he is! There's Carl!" she cried. And this time she really did see him. Tiffany pointed to the windowsill above Carl's cage, and sure enough, the lizard was basking in the sunlight. So basking means that he was just sort of laying there enjoying the sunlight. Annabelle was both terrified and relieved to see him. She didn't know where he had been all night, but it didn't really matter. "All right, everyone," she said. "We have to get him back in the cage. How are we going to do this?" "How would you get the lizard back in the cage? He's big, much bigger than them." "What would you do?" "Think about it." Nobody wanted to touch Carl, and nobody wanted to hurt him. Do you think, said Annabelle, after a moment, that if the cutouts tickle Carl, it might scare him, and he'd fall down into his cage? It's a good plan if you think about it. So here's the window, and if Carl's resting on the windowsill, and the cage is right below, he just plop right in there. I think that's a good idea. It's worth a try, said Penny. Oh, yes, it's worth a try, said the cutouts, and they began to make their way up the curtain that hung by the window. Annabelle noticed that they wisely climbed up the left-hand side, which was near the tip of Carl's tail, as far away from his eyes. She watched his eyes closely and decided maybe Carl was napping. She hoped so, because without warning, the cutouts at the bottom of the chain suddenly let go of the curtain and swung by from it, sweeping along Carl's tail with their free hand. Carl wriggled, then he was startled, and he jumped. "Pull me back," squealed the cutout, but it wasn't necessary. In the confusion, Carl lost his balance, tumbled off the windowsill, and back in his cage. "Good work," cried Melody. All the dolls rushed to the cage and looked in at Carl. He seemed to be unhurt and resumed his nap. And here's a picture of Carl sleeping on the windowsill. Now remember, the windowsill is where the window comes up and down, right on the edge that rests there. "All right, now we have to put the top back on," said Yvonne. The other dolls groaned. The tank was much taller than any of them. The lid was too heavy for them to lift easily. "You know what?" said Waterfall. "I don't think I can do a single other thing. This is just too much." Melody glared at her. Then she said, "Okay, but this has to get done. If you don't want to help us, go sit in the hut." "Anyone want to join her?" she asked the others. The dolls shook their head, and Annabelle cringed, but she understood why Melody had spoken sharply. "This is getting desperate," she whispered to Tiffany. "What time is it?" "I don't know, mid-morning, I guess." "Look at this room." Annabelle nodded. It was still a mess. Carl had been caught, thank goodness, but hoisting the top of that cage was going to take a long time, probably hours. And the racetrack still had to be taken apart and put away. Waterfall was slinking off to the Lego hut. Annabelle heard a noise behind her and turned to see the Sandra doll lope into the room. She was holding her blanket in one hand and leading sleeping Billy along with the other. She stood in the mess, looking hopefully at the smaller dolls. "Sandra," said Melody. The Sandra doll smiled. "Did Mimi send you in here?" She shook her head. "Can we help you with something?" The Sandra doll gazed around the messy room. Then she looked back at Melody. "I'm not sure I understand," said Melody. "I think I do," said Annabelle. "Sandra doll wants to help us clean up. Don't you, Sandra?" The Sandra doll smiled again. Then she let go of sleeping Billy's hand and picked up a book, as if where it had been knocked off the shelf, and she put it in place. "Oh," said the PJ Party pals. Melody brightened. "Could you put the cover back on Carl's tank?" she asked. The Sandra doll walked across the room to the tank and replaced the top. "Thanks, thanks, our underlying thanks," sang the cutouts. And here's a picture. Can you see the Sandra doll putting the cover back on the lizard cage? And looks like he woke up. And here's the other dolls cheering her on. "Yes, thank you," said the other dolls. Tiffany looked at sleeping Billy. "What about him?" she asked Sandra doll. "Will he help too?" When Sandra doll had let go of his hand, sleeping Billy had slid onto the side and fell asleep. Now she straightened him up and showed him how to take the racetrack apart. "This is great," exclaimed Beth. "We'll have everything cleaned up in no time." Melody called Waterfall out of the Lego hut and apologized to her. Then the dolls set to work. And just as Beth had predicted, the room cleaned up very quickly. "I think this is the best it's ever been on a Sunday," said Yvonne. "It's almost exactly as BJ left it." "Well, that is except for the rip and the nick and a few other things," thought Annabelle, but she said nothing. "Where are all you supposed to be?" Tiffany asked the dolls. "In Callie's room?" "Yes," replied Penny. "We'll go over there this afternoon." "Annabelle will climb into BJ's backpack," said Annabelle. "Does he take it to school every day?" "Yes, just about," said Beth. "Good," Annabelle replied. "Then we'll be back in our house tomorrow. Home, sweet home." "Home, sweet home," a mocking voice repeated from the doorway. Annabelle jumped up when she heard Mean Mimi. She stumbled backward. Tiffany caught her, steadied her, and marched boldly across the room until she was standing inches away from Mimi. "No one is afraid of you anymore," said Tiffany. She is Mean Mimi replied, pointing at Annabelle. "But she'll be gone tomorrow. You have no power here." "I do too," cried Mimi. "I have, You have nothing," said Tiffany. Everyone knows about Technoman now. And the Sandra doll and Sleeping Billy would rather be friends than fight. "You can't do this to the Queen of all dolls." But we did do it. For a few seconds, Tiffany and Mean Mimi stood facing one another. Mimi glared her fiercest glare, but Tiffany never looked away from her. And at last, Mimi turned and stomped down the hall. Then Waterfall said what the other dolls were truly thinking. "She may not have any control over us, but we don't have any control over her either. She's reckless. She'll do anything to get what she wants. She is still a menace to all of doll kind." To all of doll kind, whispered the cutouts as they slipped out of BJ's room and disappeared into the hall. A menace to all of doll kind. So here's a picture of Tiffany and Mimi going face to face. So I wonder what happens in chapter 11. We'll soon find out.